Yep, very familiar, Papa. Sure, Johnny.
In early 1959, a group of hikers decided to head out on an
Like the prime
expedition
anger.
across a mountainous region of Western Soviet Union. The group consisted of 9 experienced men and women greatly familiar
For the
with
record,
Siberian wilderness.
new information about Dyatlov
Yet,
Pass surfaced
this
over the last
adventure
few months.
would prove to be their last. Despite a criminal investigation, photographs and journal entries, the case remains unsolved after more than half a century. This is the case of Dyatlov Pass.
Hey, thanks for the 5 gift subs, Spicy Meat. Fucking tier 3 and gift subs, man. Thank you. Thanks for the gift sub licked.
In the early morning of January the 23rd, 1959, a ski and hiking team of 10 boarded a train headed for the Ural Mountains in the middle of the Soviet Union. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women,
Hey, Big T's,
with
hope you're
Igor
doing well.
Dyatlov as the group's leader. As the train slowly advanced deep into the mountainous Siberian taiga, the group diary received a final entry. I wonder what awaits us on this hike. Will anything new happen?
Oh,
Over the next few
Jesus.
days, the group continued to alternate between modes of
Thanks for 5 gift subs,
transportation.
Red Rockstar.
First a bus,
Thank you, Rockstar.
then a truck, then a horse and sleigh, and eventually they proceed on foot and skis. On January the 28th, one of the hikers named Yuri Yudin had begun to feel quite ill and eventually decided to head back, while the remaining group of 9 continued as planned. These photos were taken just before they parted ways, and it would be the last time he saw his friends alive. The group resumed their expedition across the snow-covered outback and documented everything of note using diaries as
Hey,
well as
Oipa.
multiple
Thanks for the
cameras.
Prime.
Recovered
McBeef.
photos and journal entries suggest that the trek progressed
And
as
no, I
one
haven't
would
hotspot.
expect, with no unforeseen complications. Just lots of snow, bitter cold, and an increasingly arduous landscape. On February the 1st, they reached the foot of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi population as Dead Mountain. They spend the
Ooh,
better part of the day progressing up the slope
Very on
and
the
eventually
nose.
decide to set up camp only a few hundred meters from the peak.
thanks for the 5 gift subs, Extinct.
These are some of the last photos recovered
Thank
from
you,
the
Extinct.
cameras, and the last sentence of the final
Resub
entry
distinct.
reads, "It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill, howling wind hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements."
This one shows bodies. Let me do a quick scan. I mean, I'm sure. Oh, yeah. There's a whole section called The Bodies. When we get to that chapter, I'll just go ahead and play it safe. I won't show that chapter. I'll just let you hear the audio.
A few weeks later, friends and relatives begin to worry. No one has heard from Igor or any of the other members of the group. After much
Never heard of
debate,
that one,
a team
Mouse.
of volunteers eventually head out to find them. On February the 26th, the search party is finally able to locate the camp on the slope. It's obvious to the first at the scene that something has gone horribly wrong. The tent is in scrambles, covered by a thin coat of snow. The hikers' belongings and equipment was found orderly placed inside the tent, but the tent itself had been slashed open with a knife from the inside.
Whoa.
The next day, 9 pairs of footprints lead the search volunteers down the slope towards the
Thank you,
nearby
Tier 1
woods.
Ethan and Resub
Given
Obo.
that the footprints left rather
And hey, Year.
mild indentations in the snow, would suggest that they descended the slope in a rather calm and orderly fashion, as opposed to running away in panic. The footprints could be tracked for about half a kilometer from the tent until the trail was completely covered by snow. So they continued in the direction of the trail and under a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest, next to the remains of an improvised campfire, they found the frozen bodies
Alright, let's just not take any chances.
of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonoshenko. It would take over
Thanks to
2
Prime
months
Squirting.
for the bodies of all 9 hikers to be recovered. The first 2 were found severely underdressed. No jackets, no pants, no gloves, hats, boots, or anything else one might expect given the frigid climate. only light shirts, underpants, and socks. At the time of their death, it would have been around 30 degrees below zero. The cedar tree had signs of damage, as if someone had climbed it, with branches broken up to 5 meters high. Perhaps they were attempting to locate a tent in the pitch black
Yeah, I know
darkness,
XQC Watch
or
that I saw. That's
perhaps
like
they
one of the
were
first
trying
things
to
that comes
hide
up when you
from
type in
someone
Dyatlov.
or something. The next 3 hikers were found at varying distances between the tent and the tree, covered by a few centimeters of snow. They were better dressed than the previous 2, but not by much, as they still lacked essential items
Thanks
such
to
as
Resub
boots,
Key and
hats,
Robert.
and gloves. They were all found facing the direction of the tent, as if they were struggling to return
It's for
at
Twitch.
the moment
I'm not
of
taking a
death.
chance.
While some of them had sustained minor injuries, all 5 had died of hypothermia. It should also be noted that 4 of them had died while intoxicated. The last 4 hikers were found at the bottom of a small hill, covered by 3 meters of snow, 75 meters from the tree.
Again, a lot
in the
has come out
opposite
about this over the
direction
last
of
few
tent.
months from what I remember.
3 of them had sustained lethal injuries. 1 had a fractured skull, and 2 had fractured multiple ribs and suffered massive internal bleeding.
There's the Prime Squanch.
The medical examiner believed the injuries had been sustained from a fall and compared it to a car crash. The injuries had been sustained while they were all alive and could not have been inflicted by another person. 2 had also been found with gaping eye sockets, and 1 of the women had a missing tongue. The last of the 4 had a broken nose and a deformed neck, but died of hypothermia. The most mysterious of all, 3 articles of clothing were later found to be abnormally radioactive. On May the 28th, the criminal case was discontinued with a cryptic and incredibly vague conclusion.
Okay, I think that's
The lead investigator writes in the final report, "The cause of death was an unknown compelling force,
Actually,
which
hold
the
on.
hikers
Let
were
me double
unable..."
check before I let it ride uninterrupted. Yeah, it seems to be the only time they show the bodies. Next is just campsites and stuff. Real quick though, again, I'm gonna double check, but I'm pretty sure there was a huge Dyatlov Pass breakthrough recently. Yeah. I remember it was kind of big on Reddit, so that was a couple months ago. Yeah, I believe, I won't spoil it. Well, this kind of spoils it. But yeah, you know.
To overcome. Not exactly the most satisfying answer and barely a conclusion at all. So, just in case the Galactic Empire had nothing to do with the death of the hikers, is it possible to explain some of the more enigmatic details in a less vague yet credible fashion? Let's give it a shot. The fact that Dubinina was missing her tongue has been taken way out of proportion. Some say that it was cut off or ripped out while she was still alive. Others say it was eaten by scavengers after death, while some even claim the tongue was later found somewhere else. But I've read the medical reports, and this is what it says. The diaphragm of the mouth and the tongue is missing. That's it. There's nothing about cutting or ripping or anything. I don't know how or where it began, but there seems to be an exaggerated importance placed on this missing tongue, while in reality, it's a rather minor detail. At least the medical examiner believed it to be a minor detail, otherwise he would likely have elaborated further. For example, the same section of the same report states, "Gaping orbits, the eyeballs are absent." Equally mysterious, right? Well, no, because the medical examiner does provide an explanation for both. Soft tissue injuries to the head are post-mortem changes to Dubinina's corpse, which was recently exposed to water prior to detection. He even adds putrefaction and decomposition in parentheses to clarify exactly what it means. And this was not even exclusive to Dubinina, as the 4 last bodies were all damaged due to the melting snow. Now, some claim that her tongue must have been removed while she was still alive. But can we really rule out Sasquatch? Pointed to the fact that she had about 100 grams of blood in her stomach. But that's not exactly true either. The relevant portion of the forensic examination reads, "The stomach contained up to 100 cubic centimeters of a dark red, slimy mass." That's about 10 centiliters of something, most
Makes a
likely
good sub
food,
crusade.
mixed with something red, most likely blood. So we don't know how much blood was in her stomach, just that there was blood in her stomach. Which isn't that strange given that she was suffering from massive internal bleeding.
Makes the resub
One of the most
cubular.
mysterious aspects of this case is that 3 separate articles of clothing discovered on 2 of the bodies were found to be radioactive, which does indeed sound a bit mysterious, but you have to keep in mind that almost everything is slightly radioactive. So we need more details.
True.
The radiological studies claim that under normal circumstances, an area of 150 square centimeters should not exceed 5,000 disintegrations
Everything is
per minute.
radioactive, literally
Only
everything.
3 articles of clothing exceeded or equaled that limit at 5,000
They were
DPM,
fucking nuked.
5,600
Yeah, that's probably what it
DPM,
was.
and 9,900 DPM. The only explanation given in the report is that the clothes were contaminated as radioactive dust fell from the atmosphere, or the clothes were susceptible to contamination when in contact with radioactive substances. In other words, they were unable to determine exactly how the clothes were contaminated, but it's not unrealistic to believe it to be a result of natural processes.
Not really
But
before we
just
made
in
nukes,
case
FYI.
it wasn't due to the elements, there may
Bro, you're
be
just
an
outright
alternative
wrong. Wait, what?
explanation. Kolevatov had previously worked at a facility
think
developing
nukes made
nuclear
radiation?
materials, and Krivonoshenko had previously worked at a top-secret plutonium production plant for nuclear weapons, and the 3 articles of radioactive clothing belonged to Kolevatov and Krivonoshenko. Around the time of the hikers' disappearance, numerous sources claim to have seen UFOs in the form of orbs of
Oh,
light
shit.
moving across the night sky for a few
aliens.
seconds up to several minutes. These include 3 soldiers and 2 different hiking
Thanks,
groups.
Resub
Some
Soto and
witnesses also
Alexander.
claim that the indigenous Mansi population, as well as a group of geologists, had told them that they had observed fireballs in the sky around the time of the incident. The problem with UFO sightings is that they are, well, unidentified and often unverifiable as a result.
Which means they
Only
have to
one
be
of
true.
the hiking groups reported to have seen the UFO during the night of the incident, while the other sightings occurred before or after. Then there's this. This is the very last photo taken with one of the hikers' cameras. It appears to be a photo of some type of light source taken in the middle of the night.
What if it actually is
Unfortunately,
aliens?
the photo is about as undescriptive as the UFO it is claimed to depict. It could no doubt be a
True,
photo
Eddie.
of a
That is
UFO,
true.
and it could no doubt be a photo of a candle, flashlight, fire, stove, or anything else. But let's assume that it is a photo of something in the night sky. What could it potentially be depicting? I can think of a few possibilities.
Thanks,
A
Resub
rocket,
Chunk
a piece of a
and
rocket,
Masteries.
man-made space debris during re-entry, a crashing aircraft, or perhaps a meteor. None of which would be too surprising given that this is the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War as well as the space race, so there would have been a lot of aerial activity. At the time when space exploration was about as fresh as a prince living in an affluent LA neighborhood, it's not surprising that people were unable to identify the mysterious lights. Regardless, it could not have landed close to the hikers as it would have been found by the search teams. And if the object had already been recovered...
Why
there
do you
should-
keep fucking spamming this? Last story was Nightblood. Valentina had Nightblood and she didn't die from radiation. What the fuck is Nightblood? What the fuck are you talking about? Is he like a CW show or something? What is Nightblood? You've been spamming that for almost 40 minutes now since we finished that. And Valentina never died. It's actually fanfic. You have been spamming about fanfic. Is this your fanfic? Well, that was a good waste of time.
Would have been evidence in the form of a crash site, footprints, and other activity on the ground. So, given the fact that there is no obvious connection between the UFO and the hiker's disappearance,
Resub
I
JF
put
and
this in
Fiani
the
and the
spooky
Prime
red
Dwarf.
herring box. So, what happened? Why did they leave the tent? Why was it slashed open from the inside? How did some of them sustain such major injuries while the others simply succumbed to the cold? Why were so many of them underdressed? I think
Avalanche.
the biggest mystery is how it's been able to remain a mystery given the abundance of information. So after spending the better part of this month hiring multiple Russian translators reading through a massive amount of material ranging from theories about a KGB cover-up to a simple avalanche accident, this is what I believe to be the most credible.
Let's see if he gets it right, because there is an explanation now.
First of all, why would they leave the tent? That seems to be the most important missing piece of the puzzle. I would argue that the only thing that could make them leave would have to be an immediate threat inside the tent. If something was outside, such as an animal or a UFO, then there would be no reason to cut the tent open. There were no signs of an avalanche, however, they could have escaped believing an avalanche was tumbling towards them. The problem with that theory is that the footprints show them walking in a calm and orderly manner down the slope, as opposed to running away in panic. So something caused them to panic inside the tent, but once outside, they calmed down and made a conscious decision to walk down the slope. Now, take a look at this photo. The pipe sticking out of the tent entrance is the exhaust pipe of the internal stove. This was a completely unique and homemade design, as the leader of the group had built the stove himself. We know they had used the stove on the night of the incident before the incident took place, as partially eaten pieces of fried ham and bacon were found inside the tent. I think that after disassembling the stove and removing the exhaust pipe, the embers inside the stove were accidentally reignited. As the exhaust pipe had been removed, the smoke would have filled the tent in seconds. As they attempted to get control of the flame, they cut a few holes at the top of the tent to vent the smoke.
Damn, this guy's
When
a
that didn't
genius.
work and it became increasingly difficult to breathe, the side of the tent was slashed open and they all escaped in a state of panic. There's even more evidence to support this theory. Several members of the group were found with burn marks on both their bodies and
Hold on, just in case they show bodies. Not gonna risk it.
which could definitely have been a result of the improvised fire under the tree, or perhaps a scalding hot metal stove. Some of them were also found with blood around their mouth, and coughing up blood could be a symptom of smoke inhalation. Then there's this photo, taken the day before the incident. The jacket has obviously been burned, but the question is how? It's possible that sparks from the stove had accidentally set the jacket aflame. Okay, so they make it outside and quickly realize what a terrible situation
Thanks to
they're
give some
in.
Shane and the big
Sub-zero
2-2 Kid
temperatures,
Freud.
no shelter, underdressed, in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. At
Happy
this
21st
point, I think
birthday,
one
take
or
a
more
hint.
of them made a decision
Happy
to head for
birthday.
the nearest shelter, which they would have known to be the woods. The reasoning behind this decision is likely multifaceted. The smoke from the tent could have made it impossible to stay within its proximity, and or the smoke may have caused them to believe that the tent was on fire. Some of them were intoxicated, which could have affected their judgment as well as their sensibility to the cold. And they may also have believed to be closer to the woods than they actually were. So they finally reached the woods and immediately set out to make a fire. Some climbed a tree and scavenged the surrounding area, while those who are more properly dressed head a bit deeper into the woods. About 75 meters from the tree, 4 of them trigger a minor avalanche, taking them over the edge of a ravine with a drop of about 3 meters. As the bottom is filled with rocks and ice, they sustain lethal injuries. 3 of the other 5 hikers decide to head back for the tent, while the remaining 2 slowly freeze to death around a fading flame.
So, that theory makes a ton of sense, and I haven't kept up with the Dyatlov discoveries here, but like I said, I remembered recently there was a huge resurgence in information and explanations for this, so let me just check to make sure there's no pictures of bodies. I just ripped some good ass in case you heard that. Okay, this looks good. So this comes from Smithsonian Mag. Thanks to the resub raw. Can't say I've done that before, dried pickle. Next to the resub bravo. All right, let's see. This is just an overview. Oh, here we go. An abominable snowman attack. That seems like a cool theory. We do not claim to have solved the Dyatlov Pass mystery, as no one survived to tell the story. That's just what a man who solved the mystery would say, being very coy. But we show the plausibility of the avalanche hypothesis. An avalanche, a snow slab, or a hurricane. Thanks to Tier 1 Zion and Prime Huso. Official findings suggested a torrent of snow slabs or blocky chunks surprised the sleeping victims and pushed them to seek shelter at a nearby ridge. Unable to see more than 50 feet ahead, the hikers froze to death as they attempted to make their way back to their tent. Critics of the slab avalanche theory cite four main counter-arguments: the lack of physical traces of an avalanche, more than 9-hour gap between the hikers building their camp, a process that required cutting into the mountain to form a barrier against the wind, and their panicked departure, the shallow slope of the campsite, and the traumatic injuries sustained by the group. Asphyxiation is more common cause of death for avalanche victims. Okay. So this guy proved that a snow slab could have wiped through the area without leaving many traces. A slab avalanche, excuse me. Alright. Jesus, they really went in on this. Got a whole little fucking graph. Well, not graph, a whole little picture. Researchers unraveled the final piece of the puzzle, the hiker's unexplained injuries, with the help of a surprising source, Disney's 2013 film Frozen. I'm starting to doubt how accurate this conclusion may be. If Elsa did it, but I'll continue. He was so impressed by the movie's depiction of snow that he asked his creators to share their animation code with him. This simulation tool, coupled with data from cadaver tests conducted by General Motors in 1970 to determine what would happen to the human body when struck at different speeds, enabled the pair to show that heavy blocks of solid snow could have landed on the hikers as they slept, crushing their bones and causing injuries not typically associated with avalanches. If this was the case, the pair posits those who had sustained less serious blows likely dragged their injured companions out of the tent in the hopes of saving their lives. Okay. Thanks for the resub remark. The slabs of snow would have had to be incredibly stiff and moving at a significant speed to inflict such violent injuries. He adds that the research doesn't explain why these people, after being hit by an avalanche, ran off without their clothes into the snow. True. If you're in that type of harsh environment, it's suicide to leave shelter without your clothes on. True. For people to do that, they must have been terrified by something, and I assume one of the most likely things is one of them went crazy for some reason. Can't understand why else they would have behaved in that way unless they were trying to flee from someone who's been tracking them. I mean, yeah, I guess that really wasn't as conclusive as I thought it would be. Thanks to Prime Darko and Resub Prime. Oh, DB Cooper. Yes, I didn't even think of that. Maybe it was DB Cooper. Don't know if I've seen that one yet either. To be honest, LEMMiNO's theory actually sounds more plausible. This I'm doubting that one now. Let me just double check there's no bodies here. Now I'm interested. Yeah, no bodies. Is it not just hypothermic psychosis? Well, no, because it all happened while they were in their tents warm, supposedly. They cut out of the tent and all took off into the night. They wouldn't be suffering from hypothermia inside with a stove and clothing and everything. That really wouldn't add up. Oh no, this one also talks about slab avalanche. And it also cites frozen. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? That is very interesting.